October 18th, 2010. It's Monday afternoon in DeSoto, Texas, a sprawling suburb just south of Dallas.
The lines get blurry in big towns like Dallas and the suburbs around it. It's a separate town, but when you travel and somebody asks you where you're from, you would say, I'm from Dallas.
It's mainly residential. You had like one or two places where you could go and hang out, but there was no nightlife.
Most people do go to Dallas or Fort Worth for their major entertainment. See a ball game, go to a concert, go to a club.
But that afternoon, DeSoto resident Kizzy Richardson Walker hasn't gone into Dallas for a club or concert. She's gone missing.
At the tone, please record your message.
Kizzy, it's me. Give me a call, please.
Friends hadn't talked to her. It was uncharacteristic of them not talking to her on a daily basis. And it had been some days.
Please record your message.
Please give me a call.
So after trying to call several times and because she's not responding to anyone else, I left her another message. And the message to her was, hey, I'm extremely worried. I'm going to give you 30 minutes to an hour to call me back. And if you don't call me back, we're going to the police.
It is not like Kizzy to be out of touch and not having spoken with her. So she decides to go ahead and make a call to the police.
DeSoto Police.
Hi, I'd like to report a missing person.
Okay.
Even if we were mad at each other, if one of us called, we were automatically going to answer.
Even more troubling, Kizzy has missed work.
She's a truck driver.
She loved the job. If she didn't show up to work and she was supposed to be there, something was wrong. I got a hold to her dispatcher, and she told me she was supposed to be there, and she didn't show up. They hadn't seen her.
That wasn't like Kizzy. That's not who she was.
She wouldn't just disappear like that.
At this point, I know something is wrong.
Kizzy Richardson never met a stranger.
Kizzy was very, very playful and outgoing, and she wasn't afraid.
Life with Kizzy was adventurous.
It was always a good time. We always found a way to laugh and just have fun with each other.
Kenzie's heart is bigger than Texas.
Kizzy also wasn't afraid to follow her passion.
Kizzy absolutely loved driving.
She has a great aunt that drove school buses, and so as a child, she used to play like she was a school bus driver.
What Kizzy loved the most was bikes. She loved motorcycles, enjoyed the biker clubs and the drag strips.
She eventually parlayed her love of motorsports into a career.
When the opportunity came, she decided that she was going to go to driving school.
She worked very hard to make sure that she was building a very solid foundation for herself.
It was a 9-week program to learn about driving trucks.
It's a male-dominated field, but Kizzy didn't care.
She was excited about driving trucks, and she looked good doing it. She was a diva behind the wheel.
She was definitely a pretty truck driver. She still wore her makeup, her sundresses, her little flip-flops. When you see her, you would never think that she actually was a long-distance truck driver.
But appearances aside, Kizzy had found her calling.
She loved driving trucks, 18-wheelers. That's kind of where, she seemed the most happiest is when she was driving.
She loved having the opportunity to be on the road, the different places. There were times that I was traveling for my job, and so we would call each other just to see, how far away was she.
I actually would talk to her on the road.
Hey, sis.
Where are you headed this time?
Girl, I'm heading to Houston this time.
It'd take 4 hours to get to Houston and then 4 hours back. So we would be talking about everything and then some. We would talk the whole 8-hour trip.
Everything's looking good. Heading out.
Yet as much as she loved being a long-haul trucker, there was something missing.
Kizzy was a strong, independent woman, but she still wanted that opportunity to have that romantic, loving relationship.
All she ever wanted was to find that person to give her love to.
She also wanted a family.
Kizzy loved family. She wanted to create her own. And who could blame her? That's something that we all want.
And in March of 2010, when Kizzy saw Greg Walker's profile on a dating app, he checked all the boxes.
Ooh, yeah, he is cute.
Greg is an older man. He does have a daughter, and he seems to be more mature, more established, ready to settle down.
Kizzy wanted kids of her own. And so to already meet someone that had a daughter, that was nothing for Kizzy. She loved kids.
He was the one that she had always dreamed of. He was Mr. Right. He was Mr. It. He said all the right things. He did all the right things.
They also had a lot in common.
He drove trucks too, so I thought, okay, well, that's good.
Kizzy was very excited, going on and on about how handsome he was, and, they were really rocking.
And before long, Greg proposed.
Will you marry me?
You mean it?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Their affair was actually very fast. Within the first 3 months, they were just going off and basically eloping.
We went and had dinner, and she showed me the ring and all of that. And she was elated. I was happy that she found somebody to love her. She's beautiful. Okay, let's get it. I was happy to see her future unfold.
After the wedding, Kizzy moved in with Greg and his little girl.
Hey, baby.
She actually had an awesome relationship with his daughter.
We have purple.
Ooh, purple. You love purple.
Red.
She and I used to go shopping. We went and brought her all clothes, made sure she had hair bows.
She really cared about her, so there was nothing for her to have a nurturing spirit with his daughter.
So everything was really lining up for Kizzy. It was nice seeing her happy like that.
But now, 6 months after saying I do, Kizzy has dropped off the face of the earth.
Give me a call, please.
I had attempted to call her at least 5 times.
Yolanda's next call is the police.
DeSoto Police.
One of the myths about a missing person is that you have to wait 24 hours to report them. That is not the case.
There wasn't a day that went by that she wasn't in communication with some close friends and family. So the fact that communication ceased was suspicious to people close to her.
I knew it wasn't good. I knew something bad had happened.
Because Kizzy's sudden silence isn't the only cause for concern.
I don't know if this has anything to do with it, but Kizzy and her husband are going through a divorce.
Who these dudes you text? Will you marry me?
When long-haul trucker Kizzy Richardson met Greg Walker, she was sure she'd found the person she wanted to spend the rest of her life with.
I was happy Kizzy found somebody.
All she wanted was to be loved.
She needed that love, the caressing, the thinking that you have someone that has your back.
But now, 6 months after her wedding, Kizzy has mysteriously disappeared.
Okay.
And police have just learned she was in the midst of a divorce.
Do you know what went wrong?
I think they just moved too fast.
They met on a dating site, and they were dating for a month. The next month is when they decided to get engaged.
To the best of my knowledge, the separation was amicable.
And according to Kizzy's friend Yolanda, they were still sorting things out.
She told police that on the day she went missing, Kizzy was planning to meet Greg at their old apartment.
Kizzy said that she was going to Greg to give him back a laptop that he had brought her. To say that, hey, I'm gonna give you back the gift so that you're not mad saying I owe you anything.
Yolanda's story provides a key piece of information for the police.
But I gave it to you.
Greg would have been the last person that Kizzy would have talked to.
But does that mean he had something to do with her disappearance?
You have to factor in everything. For every missing person case, you have to look into the background and the family and the friends saying, hey, we haven't heard from her. It's not like her.
After talking to Yolanda, the report is passed off to detectives who start by dropping by Greg's apartment.
It started out like, hey, we're just gonna go see if we can find her, try to find out where she's at.
But when they knocked on Greg's door, there was no answer.
So they just decide to go ahead and leave a note and say, get back to us when you can.
Then, while waiting to hear back from Greg, the detectives follow up on what Yolanda told them.
I did speak with Miss Richardson's employer, and they were very concerned. It was very out of character for her to miss work.
We started looking at bank records and her cell phone.
Okay.
They even reach out to the dealership where Kizzy had recently bought a car.
Yes.
When you buy a new car, it's not uncommon for a dealer to ask you if you want tracking on your vehicle for theft recovery or any number of reasons. We did call the dealer, and fortunately, they did have a tracker on it, so we had them activate that tracker.
Detectives are still waiting for the results of the trace when Kizzy's estranged husband suddenly shows up at the station.
Thank you for coming down to talk to us today.
No problem. When I found out she was missing, I came right here.
Greg genuinely seems like he is interested and wants to help.
The detectives start by asking Greg about his relationship with Kizzy.
We were trying to develop a rapport, making small talk, trying to find common ground.
What he tells detectives lines up with what they've already heard from Kizzy's friend, Yolanda.
He advised that they had met on a dating site. They hadn't known each other very long.
He was also surprisingly upfront about why they had split.
He said he loved her, but he wasn't in love with her, but she was good to his child, so he wanted to stay with her.
She has become very close with his daughter.
I thought that would be enough.
But it wasn't?
No.
He had said their relationship was rocky.
What were the biggest issues?
Well, she was always gone.
Kizzy was a pretty independent woman, right? Her profession calls for her to be out on the road for a couple of weeks.
You guys fight about it?
We argue, yeah.
And now the detectives want to know if those arguments have anything to do with Kizzy's disappearance.
When was the last time you saw her?
He tells police it's been a couple of weeks, probably September the 25th, when we went to a wedding together.
When was the last time you talked to her?
3 days ago, at 9 a.m. She said she would come by and grab a few things.
But according to Greg, Kizzy never showed.
I called on the phone, but there was no answer.
Greg said he was worried. At first.
But then I saw a post she made on social media.
What post?
He said it was a post she made the night she supposedly disappeared.
She had made a post that she's going to a casino in Oklahoma with another man.
When questioned about her disappearance, Kizzy Richardson Walker's estranged husband Greg tells detectives he believes she's gone to Oklahoma with another man.
He said that Kizzy had made a post on social media that she was going to a casino in Oklahoma.
From her page on Friday?
The Facebook post did say at the casino.
Could that explain why Kizzy's gone silent?
Is Kizzy on a weekend rendezvous somewhere, just out having a good time?
She was done. She wanted the divorce.
Maybe this is just her wanting to take some time to herself.
Okay, thanks for coming in. I'll see you out.
When the detectives follow up with Kizzy's family, there's more evidence that the missing woman is merely on holiday.
They got one text message from her phone saying, I'm in Oklahoma and I'm at a casino and I'm winning money.
But her friends and family are skeptical.
My take was, when did she start gambling?
We talk every day. So why are you posting? And you know that I'm calling you.
Hoping to verify the social media post, the detectives contact the casino in hopes of reaching Kizzy.
However, according to the front desk, there was no one staying at the hotel under Kizzy's name.
It was a red flag.
Or could the room be reserved under the name of the mystery man mentioned in the social media post?
Is this new man responsible for her disappearance?
Thank you very much.
Before the detectives can dig any deeper into the man's identity,
The scars, huh?
they hear back from Kizzy's car dealership. According to the GPS tracker, her car was in Dallas.
Okay.
Kizzy's vehicle was located in an area of Dallas that it's not a great area.
When the detectives meet the Dallas PD at the GPS location, it appears that the car has been abandoned.
The car license plates had been taken off, windows were rolled down, keys were on the console.
It also appears to have been recently cleaned.
Now, whether it was cleaned before when Kizzy had it, we don't know.
But what's most suspicious for detectives is what's missing from the trunk.
The spare tire cover is removed. And what's even more alarming is the carpet under the bottom of the trunk is gone.
We're starting to gather really quickly that this is not just a missing person, that we were working a homicide.
And if the killer had transported Kizzy's body in the trunk, that could explain the missing carpet and the spare tire cover.
It could also explain why the car had ended up in a high crime area with the keys inside.
It was staged there. It was pretty obvious.
The intention was to have that car stolen, have someone do something with that vehicle so that someone else could be blamed for what happened to her.
But if that was the plan, it backfired.
The car sat there for 2 or 3 days.
It was unlocked, keys were in it, but nobody touched it.
I think anybody who looked in there thought, oh, wow, this is a setup.
Hoping the car would reveal what happened to Kizzy, the forensics team searches it for DNA and prints.
The detectives also searched the surrounding areas for surveillance cameras.
Both efforts come up empty-handed.
There were no cameras in the area, and the car had been too thoroughly cleaned to provide any useful evidence.
Much like the detectives, the discovery of Kizzy's car leaves friends and family fearing the worst.
She wouldn't have just left her car like that. I knew it was foul play.
But if something terrible had happened, who was to blame? Once she hears that Kizzy's car has been found, her sister reaches out to detectives with some disturbing information.
Understand you have some information about Kizzy.
More so about Greg. He was jealous and very controlling.
It was in the finances, especially when she started making more money than he was. She drove the big 18-wheeler. He drove locally. So I think it was a shock at his manhood.
For a person, a man who wants power and control, that's not going to work. Because clearly I can't control you if you are pretty independent.
It did something to him. It didn't bother her. In her mind, she was taking care of the family. She was doing her part in being, productive in the family. He didn't see it that way. It was like a competition.
According to Kizzy's sister, Greg had found a way to assert his dominance.
He was violent. He would make threats.
His behavior is very abusive.
Kizzy called me and told me that he had pulled a knife on her.
I will kill you.
Kizzy Richardson Walker's sister has just told detectives that the missing woman's estranged husband, Greg, was threatening and abusive.
As far as Greg's behavior, everything was a red flag for me.
Greg Walker was definitely the family's #1 suspect.
Kizzy's sister tells detectives that it was Greg's behavior that led to the divorce.
The main factor in her leaving was his abuse.
It started off verbally, but it actually went to physical very quickly.
So she left him?
Not at first.
Instead, she'd mostly kept Greg's abuse hidden.
Kizzy was very private. She didn't share a lot. She didn't talk very much about her private life and relationships. That was kind of like a mystery.
But her silence didn't stop the abuse.
Things began to get gradually worse and worse.
How?
He was sure she was cheating on him.
Kizzy had a lot of cell phones, and she never threw the old ones away. So he decided while she was on the road that he was going through her old stuff.
Greg starts going through the messages, and he becomes absolutely irate.
He was jealous.
And when Kizzy came home from the road, he was waiting.
He accused her of cheating and having an affair.
Those are old phones, Greg.
Kizzy lets Greg know these messages are from prior to us getting married. But Greg is not hearing it.
You think I'm stupid?
He will not let it go.
And that's why he pulled the knife.
You even think about leaving me? I will kill you.
After Kizzy revealed the true nature of her relationship with Greg, her sister says she urged Kizzy to end the relationship.
I told Kizzy, he's showing you himself. You have to trust what he's showing you.
For once, Kizzy had stopped laughing off Greg's behavior.
She stayed with me. She would be home for weeks at a time or gone for weeks because she did long hauls. So I just kept her stuff. We kept in contact and just kept checking on each other.
As far as Kizzy's family knew, that was the end of it.
We did not really see her going back over there. All the conversations were, I'm done with him.
But Kizzy hadn't made a clean break. And on the day she disappeared, she'd supposedly gone by Greg's apartment.
She had a conversation with one of her friends and told her, I'm going to the house, I'm gonna get the rest of my stuff.
When the abuser knows that the victim is no longer in the home, but their things are there, they are going to use that as ransom. That is still about the control.
It was the last time anyone heard from Kizzy.
Now that detectives know how abusive Greg has been, they doubt it's a coincidence.
The more we learned about Greg Walker, the more we had a viable suspect.
We're going to do everything in our power to resolve this.
Okay.
I'll see you out.
To detectives, that appears even more true when they look into Greg's criminal history.
what they find is even more alarming than what they even figured.
Everything we found in his past, there was a pattern of behavior of being violent with females.
He'd even pulled a knife on another woman, the mother of his child.
He had actually cut her, and she stumbled out of the door. They were in an apartment complex, and she was able to alert some neighbors.
Had something similar happened to Kizzy.
Knowing that he's already threatened her with a knife once, his propensity for violence is already there.
It's a long way from enough evidence for a murder charge, but the record search does give detectives a way to put pressure on Greg.
He did have an outstanding warrant for his arrest.
Armed with the warrant, the detectives descend on Gregory's house.
We knocked on his door, and I'm sure he looked out the peephole and thought, oh my God, what are they doing here?
Good afternoon, officers. Have you found Kizzy?
No, I'm afraid not.
But whatever happened to her, they are now certain that Greg had something to do with it.
When the door opened, the smell of cleaning products just hit me in the face.
It was so strong.
When detectives investigating Kizzy Richardson Walker's disappearance knock on her estranged husband Greg's door, they suspect they've stumbled upon a crime scene.
When Greg entered the door, the detectives were met with a strong odor of cleaning products.
I've smelled clean homes before, but this was so overpowering.
But we have an outstanding warrant for your arrest.
No, that warrant's no good.
The detectives place Greg under arrest for the outstanding warrant.
It was a felony warrant, so we were able to immediately take him into custody.
I'm telling you, that warrant's no good. I can prove it.
He was insistent that this was a mistake, all this was taken care of, and he indicated to us he had some paperwork inside that would show that there was no warrant for him.
Where are the papers?
Inside.
Take him to the car.
Yo, y'all making a big mistake.
We agreed to enter his apartment and gather this paperwork that he wanted to provide us.
Of course, that isn't all the detective does.
This was an opportunity for us to walk inside that apartment, and at least we would know if our victim, our missing person, might be there.
There's no trace of Kizzy inside the apartment, but there are plenty of signs that Greg is up to something.
Furniture had been pushed up against the walls. It looks like the carpets were wet. You know, you could tell there was a major cleanup job going on.
We're gonna need CSI.
I remember looking at Sergeant May and I said, this is not good.
I think I said, he killed her.
But can the detectives prove it?
We got a search warrant for that apartment and brought a physical evidence section in to do forensic investigating.
It's extremely hard to completely clean up. Blood is a protein, so you may be able to get the color out, but you can't get the protein out.
Hoping to reveal the telltale stains, the forensic team uses a chemical called luminol.
Luminol reacts with proteins in the blood and glows under ultraviolet light.
So what you do with that, once you spray that on there, you turn off the lights and you hit it with a blue light.
Under the blue light, the results are undeniable.
And that room glowed.
It was just blue. The whole place was just lit up.
The carpet isn't the only place detectives find incriminating evidence.
There's a lot of stuff in the living room, and it looked like there was fluid or something everywhere. We did a presumptive blood test, and it did come back as human blood.
Now convinced that Greg killed Kizzy, the detectives haul him into the interrogation room and confront him with what they found.
But Greg isn't about to crack.
We know you did it.
We know you killed Kizzy.
I'm not talking without a lawyer.
Once he invoked his right to have a lawyer, then we were done talking to him. We knew we were just going to have to prove this case with the evidence.
And the evidence against Greg becomes even stronger when detectives receive Kizzy's cell phone records.
The records revealed the truth behind the social media posts Kizzy supposedly made from the casino in Oklahoma.
It was actually being made from Gregory's apartment. So it wasn't at any casino.
They were not from her. They were from Greg, where he was trying to act like he was her.
Comparing Kizzy's phone records with Greg's, their movements after she went missing also offer a clue to where detectives might find her.
They were able to track their cell phones together from Texas through Louisiana and stopped in Mississippi.
The detectives believe Kizzy is somewhere along that route.
Greg drove across East Texas, Louisiana, and into Mississippi, so there's no shortage of woods to dump a body.
We put a BOLO, which is to be on the lookout for, between Dallas and Florida on the highway system.
We had to go wide.
We needed to find her whether she was alive or not.
And on October 22nd, 1 week after Kizzy disappeared, the BOLO produces a possible lead.
The cigars, huh?
We got a message from Mississippi.
They had a unidentified Jane Doe that had been burnt on the side of the road.
The body is an African-American female around the age of 30 years old.
Detectives investigating the disappearance of 32-year-old Kizzy Richardson Walker have just received word that authorities in Mississippi have recovered a body that could be the missing long-haul truck driver.
The body was that of an African-American woman in her late 20s to early 30s, but she had been badly burned.
They had sent photographs the best they could, and it was difficult because we couldn't identify her.
At least not from the photos.
A couple of detectives went to Mississippi and took DNA samples from the medical examiner's office and brought them back to Dallas County.
My sister called me and she said the FBI had come and asked if Kizzy had a hairbrush or anything at her house, and they took it. They wanted that for DNA.
And they did confirm that it was her.
Once detectives confirm that Kizzy's been found, they break the devastating news to her family.
And just remember them saying they found Kizzy and she's not alive, and I just lost it.
We didn't tell them what her body condition was in. We just told them that she was deceased. It's a hard thing to do to tell somebody that your daughter was beat to death, put in the trunk of a car, driven to Mississippi, doused with gasoline, and then set on fire.
I am thankful to God that we did get closure in getting her body, what was left of it.
With the confirmation that the remains are Kizzy's, prosecutors charge Greg with first-degree murder.
As far as motive for this crime, we didn't get to talk to him long enough to get that out of him from his own mouth. But, you know, if you look at his past history, the violence in those relationships, he put a knife to her throat and he told her, "I'm gonna kill you." I think it was his intention. Once he believed that she wasn't coming back, he decided then, you know, when I have the opportunity, I'm gonna kill her.
The detectives believe that opportunity came when Kizzy dropped by the apartment on October 15th.
What are you doing?
I wanted to return this.
She went back just to give him the laptop.
But I gave it to you.
Detectives figure that led to an argument.
He probably saw that as disrespectful.
Just take it, Greg. We're done.
Why don't you come in and get the rest of your stuff then? Why it's gotta be like this, huh?
Because I'm done, Greg. I'm done.
I'm gonna tell you when you're done.
He got a dumbbell and hit her in the head.
He continued to beat her. And there was so much blood.
Then he put her in the trunk of her car. And he drove her body to Mississippi. And he set her body on fire on the side of the road. It's just hard to know that we have people on this earth that has no regards to human life.
After burning the body, he returned to Texas and attempted to cover his tracks.
He used Kizzy's cell phone to post a false trail on social media and then sent texts to family members about going to the casino in Oklahoma.
All of it was a lie.
Then he tried to destroy any evidence of a crime scene.
Mr. Walker went to great lengths to try to clean up that apartment, but you can't escape the physical evidence.
There was so much overwhelming evidence in this case that it never went to trial.
Instead, the prosecutors offer Greg a plea deal.
He decides to take it. And he's sentenced to 45 years behind bars.
That's a respectable sentence. There is justice in the fact that he's having to pay for his crime. While he's incarcerated, he can't do this to anyone else. But for Kizzy, is it justice for her? I don't know.
Kizzy's friends and family don't think so.
I wish there was not even a plea offered to him. You committed murder. And that made me feel like we'll never have justice, because to have justice would be to have her alive again. 45 years for taking somebody's life and then you burning their body. I just didn't understand.
I don't wish death on anyone. I don't even believe in the death penalty. But it definitely wasn't enough.
Because Kizzy's gone. He should be gone. You know, that's my view about it. I mean, he can still get up and eat and look at TV or call people. Kizzy can't do that.
Although even if Greg had ended up on death row, there's no righting the wrong that he'd done.
Didn't matter. It wouldn't bring her back.
Her presence. I miss it.
Everything's looking good. Heading out.
Sometimes I forgive him and then sometimes I take it back because Kizzy would be here now.
She had a lot of love to give. And if you were a recipient of that love, then you were honored.
She loved everybody and she just wanted everyone to love her. She was a beautiful person.
I know she loved me and I love her too. I know she's here right now too.
November 27, 1978, began like so many other Monday mornings in San Francisco. The fog drifted lazily over the hills before surrendering to a pale California sun. Cable cars rattled over polished steel tracks, shop owners unlocked their doors, and office workers hurried through downtown carrying paper cups of coffee that steamed against the cool morning air. At first glance, the city seemed to be following the same familiar rhythm it had known for decades. But beneath that ordinary morning lay a city divided against itself. San Francisco in the late 1970s was not simply another American city. It had become a symbol. A place where people arrived carrying dreams that had been rejected elsewhere. Young artists, anti-war activists, immigrants, musicians, labor organizers, and members of the growing gay community all found something in the city's winding streets that they could not find back home, a chance to exist without apology. To some, it was a beacon of progress. To others, it represented everything that was changing too quickly. The arguments unfolding inside City Hall were never just about budgets, housing permits, or neighborhood disputes. Every vote seemed to represent a larger battle over what America itself should become. Old traditions stood face to face with new ideals. Conservative values collided with social revolution. Hope lived beside resentment. And somewhere in the middle of that struggle stood three men whose lives would become forever intertwined. George Moscone, Harvey Milk, Dan White. Their names would eventually be written together in history books, documentaries, court records, and memorials. Yet on that November morning, few people walking past the grand stone steps of San Francisco City Hall could have imagined that before lunchtime, two of those men would be dead, and the third would quietly walk into a police station to confess. The building itself seemed eternal. Its towering dome rose above the city like a monument to democracy, inspired by the architecture of European capitals. Marble staircases curved upward beneath enormous chandeliers. Sunlight poured through high windows, painting soft patterns across polished floors that had carried generations of politicians, journalists, tourists, and ordinary citizens. Inside those walls, laws were debated. Dreams were negotiated. Careers were made. And occasionally, they were destroyed. Few government buildings inspire trust quite like a city hall. They are designed to symbolize stability, order, civilization itself. No one expects political murder inside one. Not in broad daylight. Not inside the mayor's office. Not only a few steps away from employees answering telephones and secretaries organizing paperwork. The violence that was about to unfold would shock the nation not simply because two prominent public officials were killed, but because the murders shattered an assumption that democracy itself offered protection from personal vengeance. The killer did not sneak through a dark alley. He did not wear a disguise. He did not flee the country afterward. Instead, he entered the building as someone who had belonged there only weeks before. He knew the hallways. He knew the offices. He knew where his victims would be. That familiarity transformed the building from a place of public service into the stage for one of the most infamous political assassinations in modern American history. For years afterward, investigators, historians, journalists, psychologists, and legal scholars would ask the same haunting question. How had political disagreement become personal execution? The answer, however, was never simple. It stretched backward through months of growing frustration, wounded pride, ideological conflict, financial pressure, and emotional isolation. No single argument explained it. No single conversation triggered it. Like many historic tragedies, the catastrophe grew quietly beneath the surface until one ordinary morning became irreversible. Long before the first gunshot echoed through City Hall, another story had already begun unfolding across San Francisco. The city itself was changing at extraordinary speed. Entire neighborhoods had transformed during the previous decade. Victorian homes that once sheltered working-class families were becoming gathering places for artists, students, musicians, and activists. Rainbow flags had begun appearing in storefront windows. Political campaigns no longer focused solely on taxes and crime but increasingly centered on civil rights, discrimination, and equality. For many residents, these changes represented freedom finally becoming reality. For others, they felt like losing the city they believed they had built. The divisions were emotional before they became political. People worshipped in different churches, read different newspapers, lived in different neighborhoods, imagined completely different futures for their children. Compromise became increasingly difficult because neither side believed they were merely debating policy. Each believed they were defending the soul of the city. Against this backdrop, elections became deeply personal. Every victory felt monumental. Every defeat carried lasting bitterness. It was into this atmosphere that Harvey Milk emerged as an unlikely political force. Milk had not spent his early life dreaming of elected office. He had worked a variety of jobs, lived in different cities, and experienced firsthand what it meant to hide essential parts of his identity in an America where openness often invited discrimination. By the time he settled in the Castro district, he had found something more valuable than political ambition. He had found purpose. The neighborhood itself was transforming into one of the largest centers of gay life anywhere in the United States. Men and women who had spent years pretending to be someone else suddenly discovered a community where honesty no longer required courage every waking moment. Harvey Milk possessed a remarkable ability to make strangers feel seen. He smiled easily. He laughed often. He remembered names. He listened longer than most politicians. His small camera shop became something much larger than a business. It became a gathering place where conversations about local problems naturally evolved into discussions about representation, justice, and civic participation. Milk understood something many experienced politicians overlooked. Communities rarely asked to be rescued. They wanted to be heard. His speeches were energetic, emotional, and filled with optimism even when confronting hatred. He believed visibility itself carried power. Every election campaign became less about his personal success than about proving that people long pushed into society's shadows deserved a seat at the decision-making table. Supporters admired his fearlessness. Critics considered him dangerous. Either way, almost nobody ignored him. While Harvey Milk inspired excitement among progressive voters, another figure represented an entirely different vision of public service. Dan White. If Harvey Milk appeared unconventional, White seemed almost traditional enough to have stepped from an earlier generation. He had served in the military. He had worn a police uniform. He had worked as a firefighter. Discipline, order, and responsibility shaped the way he viewed both life and government. Neighbors often described him as dependable, family-oriented, soft-spoken. His supporters appreciated that he seemed untouched by political theater. He appeared to be an ordinary working man rather than a career politician. He believed neighborhoods should remain safe. He opposed drug use. He emphasized traditional family values. Many voters found comfort in his straightforward manner. Yet appearances often conceal private struggles invisible to everyone else. Politics proved financially difficult for White. Serving on the board of supervisors paid far less than many people assumed. Supporting a family while attempting to meet the demands of public office created mounting pressure. Friends later described a man growing increasingly frustrated as financial worries collided with political disappointment. The confident firefighter who had once rushed toward burning buildings now faced problems that courage alone could not solve. Bills accumulated. Opportunities disappeared. Political alliances shifted beneath his feet. At nearly every important meeting, ideological divisions widened. White frequently found himself opposed by the city's growing progressive coalition. Among its most influential voices stood Harvey Milk. Between the two men, disagreements became increasingly public. Their differences extended far beyond legislation. Each represented a different understanding of what San Francisco should become. Neither likely imagined where those disagreements would ultimately lead. Watching over both men was Mayor George Moscone. Unlike the fiery Milk or the reserved White, Moscone possessed the calm confidence of an experienced political negotiator. He understood compromise. He believed government required balancing competing interests rather than satisfying only one side. Friends described him as approachable and charismatic. He moved comfortably between communities that often distrusted one another, believing dialogue remained possible even during periods of intense disagreement. But leading San Francisco during one of its most transformative eras required more than optimism. Every appointment carried political consequences. Every public decision pleased one group while angering another. Every alliance risked creating a new enemy. Moscone knew that leadership often meant disappointing people he personally respected. He could not have known that one such decision would soon cost him his life. As November 1978 approached its final week, tensions inside City Hall had become increasingly difficult to ignore. Behind closed office doors, conversations grew shorter. Expressions hardened. Rumors spread through corridors faster than official announcements. Staff members sensed relationships changing, though few could predict exactly how serious the situation had become. Outside, life continued as always. Tourists photographed the famous dome. Children walked to school. Street musicians performed for passing crowds. The city breathed, laughed, argued, and dreamed without realizing that history was already moving quietly through its marble halls, carried not by destiny alone, but by the choices of ordinary men whose paths were about to collide in a way that would forever alter San Francisco's story. No one standing beneath the dome of San Francisco City Hall that morning could see the invisible weight each of those three men carried. George Moscone carried the burden of leadership. Harvey Milk carried the hopes of thousands who had waited their entire lives to be represented. Dan White carried something far more difficult to recognize from the outside, a growing sense that the world around him was slipping beyond his control. History often encourages us to see tragedies as inevitable. Looking backward, every decision appears to point neatly toward the ending. Every disagreement seems destined to become catastrophe. Reality is rarely that simple. There was no single moment when someone could have looked into Dan White's eyes and known that within hours he would become one of the most infamous figures in modern American criminal history. To many acquaintances, he still appeared disciplined, respectful, reserved. A husband, a father, a former firefighter who had once devoted himself to protecting strangers. That contradiction would haunt the public long after the murders. How could someone trusted to save lives deliberately take them? It is one of the most unsettling questions in true crime because it challenges a comforting belief that violence always announces itself clearly. More often, it does not. It grows quietly beneath ordinary routines, hidden behind familiar smiles, daily obligations, and conversations that appear entirely unremarkable. During the weeks leading up to November 27, White's resignation from the Board of Supervisors had become a turning point in his personal life. The position had never provided the financial security he expected. Public office demanded endless meetings, constant criticism, and long hours, yet offered a salary that made supporting his family increasingly difficult. Friends later recalled that he worried constantly about money. He explored business opportunities. He searched for practical solutions. The pressure followed him home, lingering at the dinner table long after political debates had ended. Eventually, he resigned. To outside observers, it appeared to be a practical decision. Politics was exhausting. Family came first. Life would move on. But resignation did not bring relief. Instead, it created regret. Only days later, White changed his mind. He wanted his seat back. He believed he could continue serving. He hoped Mayor Moscone would reappoint him before selecting someone else. For a brief moment, that possibility remained alive. Moscone did not immediately reject the request. He listened. He considered the political consequences. He spoke with advisors whose opinions he trusted. Those conversations became increasingly important. Among the people encouraging Moscone not to reinstate White was Harvey Milk. Milk believed appointing White again would strengthen the conservative bloc inside the Board of Supervisors and weaken the progressive agenda that many voters had supported. Politics is often portrayed as grand speeches delivered before cheering crowds. In truth, its decisive moments frequently occur in private offices, quiet phone calls, and conversations that never appear on television. The decision forming inside the mayor's office during those days seemed routine. Appointments happened regularly. Officials came and went. Governments adjusted. No one expected the choice to echo through American history. For Dan White, however, the decision felt deeply personal. Whether justified or not, disappointment gradually became humiliation. Humiliation hardened into resentment. Resentment searched for someone to blame. There is an important distinction here. Understanding emotional decline is not the same as excusing criminal violence. Many people experience rejection without harming another human being. Many struggle financially without reaching for a weapon. The murders that followed were acts for which Dan White alone bore legal and moral responsibility. Yet understanding how a person reaches such a terrible decision remains one of the central purposes of studying crimes like this. Without understanding, history becomes nothing more than a collection of dates. Meanwhile, life inside City Hall continued according to schedule. Secretaries typed correspondence. Maintenance workers polished marble floors until they reflected the overhead lights. Visitors wandered through corridors admiring the architecture. Elevator doors opened and closed without urgency. The building itself felt almost ceremonial. Its enormous rotunda amplified footsteps into soft echoes. Bronze railings gleamed beneath chandeliers. Portraits of former leaders watched silently from polished walls, reminders that public service connected one generation to another. Employees greeted each other by first name. Many had worked together for years. Disagreements certainly existed, but government offices develop routines that make conflict appear manageable. Meetings ended. New meetings began. Deadlines arrived. Budgets demanded attention. No one expected bloodshed. Outside the building, San Francisco embraced another ordinary Monday. Along Market Street, buses released passengers who hurried toward offices carrying briefcases and newspapers tucked beneath their arms. The smell of fresh coffee drifted from neighborhood cafes. Delivery trucks backed into narrow loading zones. Street vendors arranged flowers outside small shops. The Castro district, where Harvey Milk had become a beloved public figure, slowly awakened as business owners unlocked storefronts and exchanged greetings with neighbors. Many of them had followed Milk's political journey from the very beginning. His victories had become their victories. His determination had inspired people who had spent years believing they would never see someone openly gay elected to public office. For countless young people arriving in San Francisco after being rejected elsewhere, Harvey Milk represented possibility itself. He often reminded audiences that hope could be contagious. It was not merely a campaign slogan. It reflected his understanding of loneliness. He knew what isolation felt like. He understood the exhaustion of pretending. Perhaps that was why strangers trusted him so quickly. He spoke less like a polished politician than someone who genuinely remembered what fear looked like. George Moscone inspired confidence in a different way. He possessed the patience of someone accustomed to balancing impossible demands. As mayor, every decision invited criticism. Support affordable housing and another constituency complained about taxes. Support neighborhood preservation and developers protested. Encourage progressive reforms and conservatives warned that tradition was disappearing. Attempt compromise, and both sides sometimes accused you of weakness. Leadership required accepting permanent dissatisfaction. Moscone accepted it. Those closest to him often described a man who remained remarkably calm despite constant political pressure. He enjoyed conversation. He appreciated humor. He believed disagreements did not automatically require enemies. That belief, admirable as it was, would soon collide with someone whose disappointment had grown far beyond ordinary political frustration. Morning sunlight climbed higher above the city. Inside City Hall, appointments continued according to schedule. Telephones rang. Documents moved from one office to another. Staff members exchanged casual greetings in hallways lined with marble columns. Somewhere in the building, someone laughed. Somewhere else, someone argued over paperwork. The sounds blended into the familiar rhythm of government. Then another figure approached the building. He was not a stranger. Security personnel recognized him. Employees knew his face. He had worked there, attended meetings there, walked those same corridors countless times before. Yet this visit would be different from every other. Hidden beneath his clothing was a Smith & Wesson .38 caliber revolver. Extra ammunition accompanied it. These were not objects carried by accident. Nor was his route into the building. Metal detectors had recently been installed at City Hall. Rather than walk through them, Dan White climbed through a basement window that allowed him to avoid security screening entirely. It was a small decision. Quiet. Calculated. Easy to overlook in the moment. Later, investigators would view it differently. The choice suggested preparation rather than impulse. Planning rather than panic. Step by step, White moved through hallways he knew by memory. There was nothing theatrical about his movements. No shouting. No dramatic confrontation. Nothing that immediately drew attention. People passed one another inside government buildings every day without wondering what private thoughts accompanied each familiar face. White understood the layout of City Hall. He knew where the mayor's office was located. He knew where Harvey Milk worked. He understood the routines of the building because, until recently, they had also been his routines. That familiarity removed obstacles. It also removed hesitation. As he walked deeper into the building, history narrowed toward a single irreversible point. There are moments before every great tragedy when time seems almost suspended. The world continues normally for everyone except the people whose lives are about to change forever. Across the city, children sat in classrooms learning arithmetic. Doctors examined patients. Construction workers hammered steel into concrete. Families discussed evening dinner plans without realizing the headlines that would soon dominate newspapers across America. Inside City Hall, the clock continued ticking with perfect indifference. No alarm sounded. No warning appeared. Nothing interrupted the quiet efficiency of the morning. The marble corridors remained beautiful. The polished floors reflected the light pouring through tall windows. Government employees continued believing they were participating in another ordinary workday. Within minutes, those same hallways would become crime scenes. Within hours, television cameras from across the country would gather outside the building. Within days, hundreds of thousands of people would struggle to understand how political disagreement had ended in execution. And within months, the courtroom where justice was expected to provide clarity would instead ignite one of the most controversial legal debates in American history. But all of that still belonged to the future. For now, there was only a man walking steadily through familiar corridors. A mayor preparing for another meeting. A supervisor working inside his office. 3 lives moving toward a single intersection from which none of them would ever return unchanged. The city beyond the windows continued breathing, unaware that before the lunch hour arrived, San Francisco would lose 2 of its most recognizable leaders, and the wounds left behind would not truly begin to heal for generations. The story of the Moscone Milk assassinations did not begin with a gun. It began with a city searching for its identity. To understand why the events of November 27, 1978, shook the United States so profoundly, it is necessary to step away from the marble corridors of City Hall and walk into the streets of San Francisco as they existed during one of the most transformative decades in American history. The San Francisco of the late 1970s was alive with contradictions. On any given afternoon, the scent of fresh sourdough bread drifted through Fisherman's Wharf while jazz musicians played on crowded street corners only a few miles away. Cable cars climbed impossibly steep hills lined with colorful Victorian houses whose painted facades glowed beneath the California sun. Tourists snapped photographs of the Golden Gate Bridge, believing they were visiting one of America's most beautiful cities. But beauty was only one layer. Underneath it lived constant debate. The Vietnam War had ended only a few years earlier, leaving deep political and emotional scars across the nation. The civil rights movement had transformed American law but had not erased prejudice. Women were demanding equal opportunities in workplaces that had long excluded them. Environmental activism was gaining momentum. Young Americans questioned traditions that their parents had rarely challenged. San Francisco became one of the places where these conversations were loudest. People did not simply move there because of the weather. They came because the city offered something difficult to find elsewhere. Permission. Permission to reinvent themselves. Permission to love openly. Permission to speak loudly against injustice. Permission to question authority. Every year, thousands arrived carrying little more than a suitcase and hope. Some had fled conservative hometowns where they never felt accepted. Others came seeking artistic freedom. Some wanted political change. Others simply wanted anonymity. In San Francisco, strangers often became neighbors before they became friends. Entire communities formed from people who had spent much of their lives feeling alone. The Castro district stood at the center of that transformation. Only a decade earlier, it had been a relatively quiet working-class neighborhood. Now, its sidewalks overflowed with bookstores, cafes, record shops, bars, and small family-owned businesses. Rainbow flags fluttered above storefronts not merely as decoration but as declarations of existence. People walked the streets holding hands without constantly looking over their shoulders. Not because prejudice had disappeared. Because, for perhaps the first time, they believed they outnumbered it. That feeling changed lives. For many gay men and lesbians arriving from smaller American towns, the Castro felt less like a neighborhood than a destination promised after years of loneliness. Parents had rejected them. Churches had condemned them. Employers had quietly refused promotions. Some had lost lifelong friendships simply because they stopped pretending. Then they arrived in San Francisco. Here, they found neighbors who understood without explanation. They found community. They found visibility. And eventually, they found political power. That growing influence frightened others. Many lifelong residents believed the city's rapid transformation threatened values they considered fundamental. They watched familiar neighborhoods change almost overnight. Traditional family-owned businesses closed. Housing prices climbed. New political coalitions emerged. Social norms shifted. To them, San Francisco no longer resembled the city they remembered. Fear rarely announces itself honestly. It often disguises itself as nostalgia. Many people insisted they merely wanted to preserve the character of their communities. Others genuinely believed rapid cultural change would damage public safety, family life, and social stability. These competing visions did not exist in isolation. They collided every week inside City Hall. Each vote represented far more than administrative procedure. Questions about zoning became arguments about neighborhood identity. Police funding reflected deeper disagreements about public trust. Employment policies evolved into debates about discrimination and equal rights. Politics became intensely personal because the consequences reached into everyday life. Every election felt historic. Every campaign carried emotional weight. Every public official became a symbol. Among those symbols, none shone brighter than Mayor George Moscone. Unlike many career politicians, Moscone projected warmth before authority. He smiled easily. He remembered people's names. He enjoyed conversation more than confrontation. Journalists frequently described him as approachable, while ordinary citizens often remarked that speaking with him felt less like meeting a mayor than talking with an old friend. His political philosophy reflected the changing city around him. He supported civil rights. He believed government should protect marginalized communities. He advocated for affordable housing and broader social programs. To progressive voters, he represented compassion in public office. To critics, he represented a city drifting too far from traditional values. Leadership during periods of rapid change always creates enemies. Moscone understood this. Compromise was central to his approach. He believed politics required building bridges rather than deepening divisions. Yet every compromise left someone dissatisfied. The more San Francisco changed, the more difficult balance became. Around the same time, another unlikely political figure was quietly building a movement several neighborhoods away. Harvey Milk never resembled the polished image of a traditional politician. He did not emerge from an elite political family. He had not spent decades climbing institutional ladders. His journey was far less predictable. Before entering politics, Milk had worked as a teacher, an insurance salesman, and an investment analyst. He had lived in New York, experienced success and disappointment, and gradually reached a point where pretending to fit society's expectations became unbearable. When he arrived in San Francisco during the early 1970s, he discovered more than a new address. He discovered a purpose larger than himself. His camera shop on Castro Street quickly became something unusual. Customers entered looking for film, cameras, or photography supplies. Many stayed for conversation. The small store evolved into an unofficial community center where neighbors exchanged ideas, discussed discrimination, organized events, and debated local politics. Milk listened more than he lectured. He possessed an unusual gift for making people believe their experiences mattered. That ability gradually transformed him into a leader long before he officially held public office. Election campaigns did not come easily. He lost multiple races. Each defeat disappointed him. None discouraged him. Instead, every campaign expanded his network of supporters. He walked neighborhoods relentlessly. He attended community meetings. He shook thousands of hands. Most importantly, he gave people something politicians often overlook: optimism. Milk understood that representation carried emotional importance beyond legislation itself. Simply seeing someone openly gay standing behind a podium challenged assumptions that had existed for generations. Young people struggling with their identities watched him and imagined futures that previously seemed impossible. Older members of the LGBTQ+ community saw decades of silence finally giving way to public recognition. His election to the San Francisco Board of Supervisors in 1977 became national news. It was not merely a political victory. It was cultural history unfolding in real time. Supporters celebrated in the streets. Photographers crowded around him. Television cameras broadcast images across America. For countless viewers, Harvey Milk became the face of a movement demanding visibility rather than permission. Yet admiration always creates opposition. Some critics accused him of promoting moral decline. Others attacked him personally because of his sexuality. Threatening letters became familiar. Anonymous phone calls arrived regularly. Milk accepted these risks with remarkable composure. He often joked in public. He smiled before cameras. But friends understood the seriousness beneath his humor. He knew visibility attracted danger. He simply believed silence carried an even greater cost. Not far away, another newly elected supervisor represented a completely different America. Dan White's political rise followed an almost opposite trajectory. Where Harvey Milk inspired crowds through emotional speeches, White earned trust through discipline and familiarity. He had served in the United States Army. He had worked as a San Francisco police officer before becoming a firefighter. His resume reflected institutions traditionally associated with duty, sacrifice, and order. His appearance reinforced that image. Athletic, clean-cut, soft-spoken. He rarely displayed dramatic emotion in public. Supporters admired his modesty. Many believed he represented hard-working families who felt increasingly ignored by city government. White campaigned on law and order. He opposed expanding certain social programs. He emphasized neighborhood safety. He spoke frequently about protecting traditional family values. His political base consisted largely of conservative Catholics, working-class residents, police officers, firefighters, and homeowners concerned about the city's rapid transformation. To them, White was not an extremist. He was someone who understood their concerns. Ironically, both Harvey Milk and Dan White believed they were fighting for ordinary people. They simply defined those people differently. Milk viewed government as a tool for expanding inclusion. White viewed government as a safeguard preserving stability. Neither man considered himself the villain in the political struggle unfolding around them. That made compromise increasingly difficult. Their disagreements extended beyond individual policies. Each represented a competing vision of San Francisco's future. The Board of Supervisors became the arena where those visions collided. Meetings frequently stretched for hours. Debates grew heated. Votes split along ideological lines. Journalists covering City Hall quickly recognized that personalities mattered as much as legislation. Relationships formed. Alliances shifted. Resentments accumulated. While newspapers often summarized these conflicts with headlines and vote counts, the reality inside government was far more human. People remembered slights. They questioned motives. They carried frustration home after meetings ended. Political conflict rarely remained inside council chambers. It followed officials into restaurants, neighborhood events, church gatherings, and family dinners. By late 1978, San Francisco's government had become a reflection of the city itself. Energetic, hopeful, creative, divided. No one could yet see how fragile that balance truly was. The marble walls of City Hall still echoed with debate instead of gunfire. The arguments remained verbal. The conflicts remained political. Most people believed democracy, however imperfect, would continue functioning as it always had. History, however, often hides its turning points inside moments that appear completely ordinary. And somewhere beneath the optimism of a city determined to redefine itself, tensions were quietly gathering strength, waiting for a single decision to transform political disagreement into irreversible tragedy. For newcomers arriving in San Francisco during the late 1970s, the city often felt like a promise fulfilled. For those who had lived there for generations, it sometimes felt like a promise rewritten. The contrast could be seen from one neighborhood to the next. Elegant homes overlooked the bay from steep hills, while only a few blocks away aging apartment buildings sheltered students, artists, and working-class families struggling to keep pace with rising costs. Expensive restaurants stood beside modest cafes where political discussions lasted longer than the meals themselves. Every street seemed to contain two different versions of the city, each convinced it represented the authentic San Francisco. Local newspapers reflected that division every morning. One editorial praised progressive reforms as evidence that the city was leading America toward a more equal future. Another warned that crime, social unrest, and cultural change threatened the foundations of public life. Readers rarely finished both articles agreeing with each. Instead, opinions hardened. Conversations became debates. Debates became identities. The political atmosphere inside City Hall mirrored that growing polarization. The Board of Supervisors was no longer simply responsible for managing city government. It had become the stage upon which larger national conflicts played out in miniature. Questions surrounding housing, policing, labor rights, discrimination, education, and public spending were never isolated issues. Each decision symbolized a broader vision of what kind of society San Francisco, and perhaps America itself, should become. George Moscone understood this better than most. He had spent years navigating California politics before becoming mayor, learning that successful leadership often required disappointing allies as much as confronting opponents. He was not interested in governing only for those who had voted for him. His ambition was larger than electoral victory. He wanted San Francisco to become a city where communities that had historically distrusted one another could coexist, even if they never fully agreed. It was an admirable goal. It was also extraordinarily difficult. Every appointment he made was scrutinized. Every speech was analyzed. Every political alliance carried consequences that extended far beyond City Hall. Supporters viewed him as courageous. Critics accused him of moving the city too far, too fast. The pressure never truly disappeared. Yet those who worked closely with Moscone often noticed that he rarely allowed frustration to dominate his demeanor. He remained patient during contentious meetings. He listened before speaking. Even when conversations became heated, he usually responded with measured calm rather than visible anger. It was a leadership style built upon the belief that people could eventually find common ground. That belief would soon be tested in ways no one could have imagined. Harvey Milk approached politics from an entirely different direction. If Moscone represented experience, Milk embodied momentum. He possessed an infectious enthusiasm that seemed almost impossible to exhaust. Long after formal meetings ended, he could still be found speaking with residents on sidewalks, attending neighborhood events, or standing inside his camera shop discussing city issues with anyone willing to listen. His energy did not come from ambition alone. It came from memory. Milk never forgot what life had felt like before arriving in San Francisco. He remembered hiding essential parts of himself. He remembered watching careers disappear because of prejudice. He remembered the quiet fear that accompanied simply existing in a society where honesty could cost friendships, employment, or family relationships. Those memories shaped every speech he delivered. He rarely spoke only about policy. He spoke about dignity. He spoke about belonging. He spoke about the simple human desire to live openly without fear. People responded because they recognized authenticity rather than performance. His supporters were not merely voting for a politician. Many believed they were finally seeing themselves represented inside government. Letters arrived daily from across the country. Some came from parents thanking him for giving hope to their children. Others came from young people who admitted they had never before believed someone like them could hold public office. Not every message was kind. There were threats, insults, anonymous warnings. Milk accepted them as part of the price of visibility. Friends occasionally urged him to become more cautious. He acknowledged the danger without allowing it to dictate his choices. His philosophy remained remarkably consistent. Progress required courage, and courage inevitably attracted resistance. Across the ideological divide, Dan White experienced the same city through a very different lens. He did not view himself as standing against progress. He believed he was defending values that had helped build stable communities for decades. His supporters often felt caricatured by the media as obstacles to change when, in their own minds, they were simply trying to preserve neighborhoods where families could safely raise children. White's life had been built around service. Military discipline had shaped his early adulthood. Law enforcement introduced him to the realities of crime and violence. Firefighting demanded teamwork, composure, and personal sacrifice. Each profession reinforced his belief that order depended upon responsibility. Politics, however, proved unlike anything he had previously experienced. Firefighters faced visible emergencies. Politicians confronted invisible ones. Instead of flames, there were accusations. Instead of smoke, there were rumors. Instead of rescuing strangers, there were endless compromises that satisfied almost no one. White found the environment increasingly frustrating. Unlike many experienced politicians, he struggled to separate personal conviction from political defeat. Votes against his proposals felt deeply personal. Public criticism lingered long after meetings ended. Financial pressure intensified those emotions. The salary of a city supervisor proved insufficient for the lifestyle he hoped to provide his family. Unlike his previous careers, public office demanded significant personal sacrifice without corresponding financial stability. Friends later described a man becoming quieter, more withdrawn, increasingly discouraged. None of these observations predicted violence. Many public officials experience disappointment without committing crimes. Many endure financial hardship while maintaining integrity. Yet emotional isolation can alter the way individuals interpret ordinary setbacks. Decisions that once appear temporary begin to feel permanent. Professional disagreements become perceived betrayals. Rejection begins to resemble humiliation. By the autumn of 1978, White's dissatisfaction had become impossible to ignore. When he announced his resignation from the Board of Supervisors, many colleagues assumed the decision was practical. Politics simply wasn't worth the financial burden. His departure created an unexpected vacancy. Life inside City Hall continued. Attention shifted toward selecting his replacement. Then something changed. White reconsidered. He wanted his position back. The request surprised many observers. Some believed it reflected renewed commitment. Others interpreted it as uncertainty. Mayor Moscone found himself confronting an increasingly delicate decision. Should he reappoint White, restoring stability while potentially angering progressive allies? Or should he appoint someone new, strengthening his political coalition while risking resentment from White and his supporters? Neither choice offered an easy solution. Private meetings multiplied. Phone calls stretched late into the evening. Political advisers presented competing arguments. Community leaders expressed their opinions. Among those urging Moscone not to reinstate White was Harvey Milk. Milk viewed the appointment through political strategy. The Board of Supervisors remained closely divided. Replacing White with a more progressive supervisor would significantly influence future votes on issues central to Milk's vision for the city. From his perspective, recommending another candidate was neither personal nor vindictive. It was politics. The kind practiced every day in democratic government. Yet politics rarely feels abstract to those directly affected. For Dan White, the discussions surrounding his future unfolded without him controlling the outcome. He waited. He hoped. He watched as decisions about his career rested in the hands of colleagues whose priorities increasingly differed from his own. Inside City Hall, rumors spread quietly through hallways and offices. Staff members speculated about the mayor's choice. Some believed White would return. Others insisted Moscone had already decided otherwise. No official announcement had yet been made, but uncertainty lingered over the building like a gathering storm. Outside, however, San Francisco remained beautifully unaware. Couples strolled through Golden Gate Park beneath towering eucalyptus trees. Ferries crossed the bay carrying commuters home at sunset. Children laughed in schoolyards. Street musicians filled public squares with music. Life continued with remarkable normality. History often advances unnoticed until the moment it suddenly becomes impossible to ignore. In the days before November 27th, nothing about the city's appearance suggested that one of the most consequential acts of political violence in modern American history was approaching. The skyline remained unchanged. The streets remained crowded. The conversations inside cafes revolved around ordinary concerns. Only those closest to City Hall sensed that relationships had become unusually strained. Even then, few imagined anything beyond another contentious political dispute. No one expected bullets. No one expected mourning. No one expected that the names George Moscone, Harvey Milk, and Dan White would soon become permanently linked, not by legislation or elections, but by a tragedy that would forever alter the history of San Francisco, reshape public conversations about justice, and leave scars that would remain visible long after the marble floors of City Hall had been cleaned of blood, long before their names became forever connected by tragedy. George Moscone and Harvey Milk were simply two men who believed, in very different ways, that government could improve people's lives. Their journeys toward public office could not have been more different. One came from the established world of California politics. The other arrived through the front door of a small neighborhood camera shop. Yet both eventually found themselves standing on the same side of history, advocating for a city that embraced those who had too often been pushed aside. To understand why their deaths sent shockwaves across America, it is first necessary to understand how they lived. George Richard Moscone was born on November 24, 1929, into a working-class Italian-American family in San Francisco. Unlike many politicians who built careers by carefully crafting public images, Moscone's roots were deeply connected to the city he would one day lead. He knew its neighborhoods. He understood its rhythms. He watched generations of families struggle through economic uncertainty while remaining fiercely loyal to the communities they called home. Those early experiences shaped his understanding of public service. Politics, to Moscone, was never merely about passing legislation. It was about people. Friends from his younger years remembered someone who combined confidence with an unusual warmth. He enjoyed conversation, possessed a quick sense of humor, and rarely treated anyone as unimportant because of their social status. Whether speaking with business leaders or laborers, he displayed the same relaxed manner that would later become one of his defining political strengths. After studying law, Moscone entered public life during an era when California itself was changing rapidly. The state experienced dramatic population growth. Cities expanded. Universities filled with students challenging long-held traditions. Civil rights movements reshaped national conversations. Political leaders increasingly faced questions that previous generations had rarely confronted. Moscone adapted to those changes rather than resisting them. As a member of the California State Senate, he gained a reputation as a thoughtful legislator willing to support causes that others considered politically risky. He advocated for civil liberties. He opposed discrimination. He believed government should actively protect vulnerable communities rather than merely preserve existing systems. Supporters admired his willingness to stand with unpopular causes when he believed they were morally justified. Critics viewed those same decisions as evidence that he leaned too far toward progressive politics. The disagreements never discouraged him. In 1975, George Moscone became the 37th mayor of San Francisco. His election symbolized more than personal success. It reflected the city's transformation into one of the nation's leading centers of political and cultural change. As mayor, Moscone inherited a city bursting with creativity, diversity, and ambition. He also inherited deep divisions. Every decision required balancing competing interests. Neighborhood preservation competed with economic development. Police reform collided with concerns about crime. Civil rights initiatives generated fierce public debate. Leading San Francisco demanded constant negotiation between groups whose visions of the future often appeared fundamentally incompatible. Moscone rarely sought dramatic confrontation. Instead, he relied upon conversation. Those who worked closely with him frequently described long meetings where he patiently listened before offering his opinion. He preferred persuasion over intimidation. His office door remained open to community leaders, activists, labor organizers, business owners, clergy, and ordinary citizens who believed they deserved to be heard. That accessibility earned him respect even among some political opponents. Not everyone agreed with his policies. Many acknowledged his sincerity. At home, however, George Moscone was more than a mayor. He was a husband. A father. Family members later remembered moments far removed from newspaper headlines and political speeches. They remembered shared meals. Vacations. Quiet evenings interrupted by work-related phone calls. The ordinary routines that exist behind every public career. Like countless elected officials, Moscone often struggled to separate professional responsibilities from family life. Political emergencies ignored weekends. Public expectations rarely paused. Yet those closest to him recalled a man who genuinely valued the time he spent away from City Hall whenever circumstances allowed. He understood that public office was temporary. Family was not. Only a few miles away, another future political leader was living a life that appeared to have little connection with California government. Harvey Bernard Milk was born on May 22, 1930, in Woodmere, New York. Raised in a middle-class Jewish family on Long Island, Milk grew up in a society where conformity often determined acceptance. From an early age, he displayed intelligence, humor, and an outgoing personality. He enjoyed sports. He loved opera. He possessed an expressive nature that attracted friends easily. Yet beneath that outward confidence existed a secret that countless gay Americans of his generation understood all too well. His sexual orientation. Mid-20th century America offered little safety for openly gay men. Homosexuality remained widely condemned socially. Employment discrimination was common. Public exposure could destroy careers. Families often responded with rejection rather than understanding. Like many others, Milk learned to compartmentalize his identity. He built professional success while carefully protecting deeply personal truths. After graduating from college, he served in the United States Navy during the Korean War era. Military service required discipline. It also reinforced the necessity of secrecy. Following his discharge, Milk pursued a remarkably varied career. He worked as a teacher, an insurance statistician, a Wall Street investment analyst. Each position provided financial stability but failed to satisfy something more fundamental: purpose. Friends from those years often described a man searching for meaning rather than simply employment. He enjoyed intellectual conversation. He appreciated art and theater. He questioned social expectations. Gradually, the carefully constructed life he had built no longer felt authentic. By the early 1970s, Milk left New York behind and relocated to San Francisco. The move would change not only his own life but the course of American political history. San Francisco offered possibilities unavailable elsewhere. For perhaps the first time, Milk found a community where openness did not automatically invite isolation. The Castro district welcomed thousands of gay men and lesbians seeking acceptance after years of hiding. The atmosphere felt electric. People organized neighborhood associations, started businesses, created newspapers, held community festivals. The neighborhood developed a sense of shared identity unlike anything Milk had previously experienced. Together with his partner, Scott Smith, Harvey opened Castro Camera, a modest photography store. The business never became famous because of the cameras it sold. Its importance came from the conversations taking place inside. Customers frequently remained long after completing purchases. Neighbors stopped by simply to talk. Activists organized campaigns. Volunteers discussed local issues. Political ideas circulated between shelves lined with film and photography equipment. Milk gradually became less of a shopkeeper and more of a community organizer. He listened carefully. He remembered details about people's lives. He encouraged individuals who had never considered participating in politics to register to vote. His charisma proved impossible to ignore. Unlike polished politicians who relied heavily upon rehearsed speeches, Milk communicated with emotional honesty. He laughed loudly. He spoke passionately. He admitted mistakes. People trusted him because he seemed unapologetically human. That authenticity became his greatest political strength. When Harvey Milk first announced his candidacy for public office, few observers considered him likely to succeed. Openly gay candidates faced enormous prejudice throughout the United States. Many political consultants advised against emphasizing his identity. Milk ignored them. He refused to separate who he was from what he believed. Campaign after campaign ended in defeat. Each loss taught valuable lessons. He refined his message, expanded his coalition, strengthened relationships with labor unions, neighborhood organizations, and civil rights advocates. Instead of disappearing after electoral setbacks, he became increasingly visible. Persistence eventually transformed skepticism into momentum. In 1977, Harvey Milk won election to the San Francisco Board of Supervisors. The victory represented far more than a single seat in local government. He became one of the first openly gay elected officials in California and one of the most recognizable LGBTQ+ political leaders in the nation. Celebrations erupted throughout the Castro. Supporters filled the streets. People hugged strangers. Some cried openly. For older members of the community who had spent decades believing such representation impossible, the election felt almost unimaginable. For younger people still struggling to accept themselves, Milk became living proof that authenticity did not automatically prevent success. He understood the symbolic importance of his position. Every speech carried additional weight. Every interview reached audiences far beyond San Francisco. He frequently reminded listeners that hope itself possessed extraordinary power. He encouraged young people never to surrender to despair. He challenged discrimination not through bitterness but through visibility. His optimism inspired thousands. It also attracted increasingly hostile criticism from opponents who viewed his influence as evidence of profound cultural change they neither welcomed nor understood. Despite their different backgrounds, George Moscone and Harvey Milk developed a strong political relationship rooted in shared values. Both believed diversity strengthened cities. Both supported expanding civil rights. Both viewed government as an instrument capable of protecting marginalized communities. Their alliance became increasingly significant inside City Hall, where progressive reforms often depended upon careful cooperation among elected officials. Outside politics, they also shared an approachable quality that distinguished them from many public figures. Neither cultivated distance. Both preferred conversation. Citizens frequently encountered them attending neighborhood events, speaking with residents, or walking city streets without elaborate security. They remained accessible because they believed democracy required more than elections. It required connection. Neither man could know that those very qualities, their visibility, their openness, and their willingness to stand publicly for their convictions, would soon place them directly in the path of one of the darkest mornings in San Francisco's history. If George Moscone represented experienced leadership and Harvey Milk embodied a new political generation, then Dan White stood as the face of another San Francisco entirely. To understand the tragedy that was approaching, it is impossible to view White simply as the man who pulled the trigger. Before he became known around the world for an act of extraordinary violence, he had spent years building a reputation that seemed almost incompatible with the crimes he would later commit. Dan Joseph White was born on September 2, 1946, into a devout Irish Catholic family in San Francisco. Faith, discipline, and responsibility shaped the environment in which he was raised. His family valued hard work above almost everything else. Respect was earned through action rather than words. Neighbors looked after one another. Children were expected to obey their parents. The traditions of family and church formed the rhythm of everyday life. White appeared to embrace those values naturally. Friends from his younger years described him as athletic, polite, and intensely competitive. He enjoyed sports and physical activity. Unlike outspoken classmates who naturally attracted attention, White was generally quieter. He did not seek the spotlight. He preferred action to conversation. After graduating from high school, he enlisted in the United States Army. Military service reinforced the discipline that had already become central to his personality. Schedules were strict. Orders were followed. Personal feelings often gave way to collective responsibility. The structure suited him. When his military service ended, White returned home and pursued another profession built upon discipline and public service. He joined the San Francisco Police Department. Working as a police officer exposed him to a side of the city many residents never experienced. Domestic disputes, violent crime, drug addiction, poverty. Moments of desperation unfolding behind closed apartment doors. The work demanded emotional control. Eventually, White left policing and became a firefighter, a profession that earned tremendous respect throughout San Francisco. Firefighters entered danger while others fled from it. The work was physically demanding. The risks were obvious. Communities admired them. Among his fellow firefighters, White developed a reputation for reliability. He trained hard. He arrived prepared. He understood teamwork. To many who knew him during those years, he appeared to be exactly the sort of man people wanted protecting their neighborhoods. That image followed him into politics. When White announced his candidacy for the San Francisco Board of Supervisors, supporters viewed him as someone who understood ordinary working families. He spoke plainly. He avoided elaborate rhetoric. He emphasized practical concerns rather than sweeping ideological visions. His campaign centered on public safety, neighborhood stability, and fiscal responsibility. Many voters trusted him because he seemed authentic. He did not resemble a polished career politician. He looked like someone they might meet at church, at a youth baseball game, or at the local fire station. In 1977, the same election that brought Harvey Milk into office also placed Dan White on the Board of Supervisors. Both men arrived carrying mandates from communities that viewed the future through entirely different lenses. Neither election was accidental. Each reflected genuine public support. Each represented thousands of citizens who believed their concerns deserved representation inside City Hall. At first, there was little reason to believe their ideological differences would lead beyond ordinary political conflict. Disagreements are expected in democratic government. Votes are won. Votes are lost. Compromises are negotiated. Personal relationships often survive professional disputes. Yet beneath the surface, subtle tensions accumulated. White frequently aligned himself with more conservative members of the board. Milk consistently advocated progressive reforms. Their debates occasionally became pointed. Newspapers began portraying them as political opposites. Supporters on both sides increasingly viewed each vote as part of a larger cultural struggle. It would be misleading to portray the relationship as one of constant personal hostility. The reality was more complicated. They occupied different political worlds. They represented different constituencies. Their priorities rarely overlapped. As San Francisco continued changing, those differences became more difficult to bridge. While political disagreements grew increasingly public, White's private life became more complicated. Unlike many citizens assumed, elected office did not bring financial comfort. The annual salary for a supervisor was modest. Supporting a wife and young children while maintaining the obligations of public office placed considerable strain upon the family's finances. White explored business opportunities hoping to supplement his income. Some ventures failed. Others produced disappointing results. Financial uncertainty gradually replaced optimism. Friends later recalled that he seemed increasingly discouraged. He worried about providing for his family. He questioned whether remaining in politics was practical. The confidence that had characterized his earlier careers appeared to weaken. Those close to him noticed subtle changes. He became quieter. Less social. More withdrawn after long meetings. None of these observations predicted murder. They simply reflected a man struggling with disappointment. In many respects, White's experience was far from unique. Public service often demands personal sacrifice. Political criticism becomes relentless. Victories are temporary. Defeats linger. Many elected officials eventually conclude that the profession asks more than it gives. On November 10, 1978, White announced his resignation from the Board of Supervisors. Officially, the explanation centered largely on financial hardship. He believed he could no longer afford to continue serving. The announcement surprised colleagues but did not immediately generate controversy. Resignations occurred. Life moved forward. Attention shifted toward finding a replacement. Yet within only a few days, uncertainty emerged. White regretted his decision. He asked Mayor George Moscone to allow him to withdraw the resignation and reclaim his seat. The request transformed what had seemed like a routine administrative matter into a politically sensitive dilemma. Moscone did not answer immediately. He listened to advisors. He considered legal questions. He evaluated political consequences. His administration faced increasing pressure from competing groups. Conservative supporters argued that White should be reinstated. Progressive leaders urged the mayor to appoint someone who better reflected the city's evolving political landscape. Among those encouraging Moscone to choose another candidate was Harvey Milk. Milk viewed the vacancy strategically. Replacing White with a progressive supervisor would strengthen support for legislation involving civil rights, housing, and social reform. From Milk's perspective, recommending a different appointment was a legitimate political decision rather than a personal attack. Politics frequently requires difficult choices. Appointments often disappoint someone. No one involved publicly suggested that violence might follow. Mayor Moscone eventually reached his decision. He would appoint another individual rather than restore White to office. The announcement had not yet become public. Only a relatively small circle inside City Hall knew the outcome. Dan White learned enough to understand that his political future had effectively ended. Exactly what emotions passed through his mind during those final hours before November 27 can never be known with certainty. Court testimony, interviews, and later analysis provide pieces rather than complete answers. Some observers believed humiliation overwhelmed him. Others emphasized depression, financial anxiety, and emotional exhaustion. Still others argued that ideological resentment had gradually intensified until it eclipsed reason. Human beings rarely act because of one single motive. Lives are more complicated than courtroom theories. What remains beyond dispute is that White made a series of deliberate decisions during the evening before and the morning of November 27. He retrieved his Smith & Wesson .38 caliber revolver. He gathered extra ammunition. He drove toward City Hall. Rather than entering through the front security checkpoint, where recently installed metal detectors might discover the weapon, he climbed through a basement window he knew from his years working inside the building. Each action narrowed his available choices. Each step carried him further toward an outcome from which there would be no return. Meanwhile, George Moscone arrived at work expecting another demanding Monday. Harvey Milk prepared for meetings and conversations that reflected the ordinary responsibilities of elected office. Secretaries organized schedules. Staff members answered telephones. Visitors entered the building seeking permits, assistance, or appointments. The routines of government unfolded with quiet predictability. No one inside those marble corridors understood that 3 political careers were about to converge for the final time. Within minutes, one man would lose his life inside the mayor's office. Another would be killed only steps away. The survivor would leave the building, drive to a police station, and calmly surrender. The city that had spent years debating its future through elections and legislation was about to confront a tragedy that could no longer be resolved by votes alone. It would become a story of grief, justice, outrage, and memory, a story whose consequences would spread far beyond San Francisco and remain etched into American history for generations to come. The morning of Monday, November 27, 1978, began with remarkable ordinariness. That, perhaps, is what makes history's darkest days so unsettling. There was no dramatic warning written across the sky. No sense of approaching catastrophe that caused people to hesitate before leaving their homes. San Francisco awakened exactly as it had countless mornings before. The first commuters crossed the Bay Bridge while dawn still lingered over the water. Office buildings gradually filled with secretaries, accountants, lawyers, and city employees carrying briefcases and folded newspapers beneath their arms. Cafes welcomed their regular customers, who exchanged familiar greetings before settling into conversations about football scores, holiday plans, and the approaching Thanksgiving season. The city was preparing for another workday. Nothing more. Inside San Francisco City Hall, the atmosphere reflected the same quiet routine. The magnificent Beaux-Arts building, crowned by its towering dome, had already begun to fill with the sounds of government at work. Elevator doors opened and closed with mechanical precision. Telephones rang from behind polished wooden office doors. Clerks sorted documents into carefully organized stacks while maintenance workers completed their final rounds through hallways whose marble floors gleamed beneath the morning light. Visitors wandered through the building, some admiring the architecture, others hoping to resolve permits, licenses, or neighborhood concerns before returning to their daily lives. To them, City Hall represented stability, order, the visible face of local democracy. Very few gave any thought to security. Metal detectors had only recently been installed near public entrances, a reflection of growing concerns following several violent incidents involving elected officials elsewhere in the United States. Even so, the atmosphere remained relaxed. Employees recognized one another by name. Supervisors greeted staff in passing. Reporters drifted through the corridors searching for routine political stories. No one expected to witness history. George Moscone arrived carrying the responsibilities of another busy Monday. His schedule reflected the endless rhythm familiar to every mayor. Meetings, appointments, phone calls, policy discussions, community concerns. Like most public officials, Moscone balanced dozens of issues simultaneously. Housing, transportation, labor negotiations, public safety, and neighborhood development all demanded attention before the day ended. Staff members later remembered nothing unusual about his mood. He appeared composed, focused, professional. If the political tension surrounding Dan White's resignation occupied his thoughts, he showed little outward sign of it. Leadership often required difficult conversations. This would simply become another. Elsewhere inside the building, Harvey Milk was equally occupied. The newly elected supervisor had developed a reputation for keeping an energetic schedule that extended far beyond formal government meetings. Constituents frequently stopped him in hallways. Activists sought his advice. Journalists requested interviews. Neighbors approached him with problems they believed only Harvey would truly hear. He welcomed that accessibility. Rather than distancing himself behind layers of staff, Milk often preferred direct conversation. People mattered to him. Politics, in his view, existed because of people, not the other way around. That Monday promised to be no different. The holiday season was approaching. Community events required planning. Legislation remained unfinished. His office reflected the organized disorder familiar to many dedicated public servants. Documents rested in neat stacks across desks. Letters from constituents awaited replies. Notes from previous meetings remained scattered beside schedules for the days ahead. Nothing inside the room suggested that those papers would soon remain forever untouched. Across the city, Dan White began his own morning. Unlike Moscone and Milk, he no longer officially belonged inside City Hall. His resignation had altered that relationship. Yet emotionally, he had never truly left. Witnesses later reconstructed much of his movements through testimony, timelines, and investigative interviews. White prepared carefully before leaving home. He carried a Smith & Wesson Model 36.38 caliber revolver. He also carried extra ammunition. These details would later become central to the prosecution's argument. They suggested preparation rather than spontaneous anger. His destination was already decided. The drive toward downtown San Francisco was neither hurried nor chaotic. Traffic moved normally. Drivers obeyed signals. Pedestrians crossed intersections carrying shopping bags and briefcases. Nothing distinguished White's vehicle from hundreds of others moving through the city that morning. Inside the car, however, only one man knew precisely where he intended to go. Exactly what occupied his thoughts during that drive remains unknowable. No recording exists. No witness sat beside him. History can reconstruct actions with remarkable precision. Motives are often less certain. What investigators later established beyond dispute was the sequence of choices he made after arriving at City Hall. Those choices mattered. Very much. Rather than entering through the public entrance equipped with metal detectors, White approached a basement window. Years spent serving as a supervisor had familiarized him with the building's layout. He knew alternate routes. He understood which entrances received less attention. Climbing through the basement window required effort. It also required intent. The action bypassed security measures specifically designed to prevent weapons from entering government offices. That single decision would later become one of the strongest indications that his conduct involved planning rather than sudden emotional impulse. Once inside, White found himself surrounded by familiar surroundings. The polished corridors had not changed. The staircases remained silent beneath morning footsteps. Portraits still lined the walls. Employees continued their routines, unaware that an armed former colleague had entered the building carrying a concealed revolver. Several people noticed White as he moved through City Hall. His presence did not immediately cause alarm. After all, many employees had worked beside him only weeks earlier. Recognition replaced suspicion. Some nodded politely. Others exchanged brief greetings. No one imagined danger. White continued toward the mayor's office. The walk itself required only minutes. Each step carried him deeper into the building where he had once conducted ordinary government business. Each hallway represented familiar territory. There was no confusion. No hesitation about directions. He knew exactly where he was going. Inside the mayor's office, George Moscone prepared for another meeting. When White arrived, the atmosphere initially appeared calm. Accounts from investigators and later court testimony indicate that Moscone invited White into a private area adjoining the main office. The conversation began away from staff members. No raised voices echoed into the hallway. No immediate disturbance alerted employees outside. What exactly the two men said during those final moments can never be known with certainty. Only one participant survived. Evidence suggests that Moscone informed White he would not be reappointed to the Board of Supervisors. Whether the explanation was gentle or direct, compassionate or formal, history cannot answer. What happened next unfolded in only seconds. White drew the revolver. Without warning, he fired. The first bullet struck Mayor Moscone in the chest. The impact threw the mayor backward. The quiet office that moments earlier had hosted an ordinary political discussion erupted into unimaginable violence. There was almost no opportunity for defense. Almost no opportunity to escape. Investigators later concluded that after the initial shots, White moved closer. He fired additional rounds into Moscone's head at close range. The wounds proved catastrophic. Death came almost immediately. Inside one of the highest offices in San Francisco's government, the city's mayor lay mortally wounded upon the floor. The room fell silent. No lengthy confrontation had preceded the shooting. No extended struggle. The entire attack consumed only moments. Outside the office, employees remained largely unaware of what had occurred. Some heard sounds that might have been mistaken for construction noise. Others noticed nothing at all. Government buildings are rarely quiet. Doors slam. Heavy objects fall. Maintenance work creates unexpected echoes. Few immediately recognized gunfire. White left the mayor's office carrying the same revolver. He had already committed an act that would shock the nation. Yet he was not finished. Instead of fleeing the building, he turned toward another office. Another familiar face. Another man whose name had become deeply connected to the political conflict that had unfolded during the previous weeks. Harvey Milk. The distance between the two offices was remarkably short. Only a brief walk separated the mayor's suite from Milk's workspace. For White, the route required no guidance. He had traveled those corridors many times before as a member of the Board of Supervisors. Staff members continued working. Telephones continued ringing. Conversations continued behind closed doors. No one yet understood that the first murder had already taken place. Within moments, another would follow. Harvey Milk was in his office when Dan White approached. Like so many mornings before, the room reflected the constant motion of public service. Papers covered the desk in careful stacks. Calendars marked upcoming meetings. Notes from constituents waited to be answered. Staff members moved in and out, discussing schedules, neighborhood concerns, and the countless small responsibilities that filled the life of an elected official. Nothing inside the office suggested that the ordinary rhythm of the day was about to end forever. When White arrived, he was not treated as a stranger. He did not force his way inside. He did not announce himself with threats. He was someone Harvey Milk knew. Someone with whom he had debated legislation, attended meetings, and shared the responsibilities of governing the same city. That familiarity lowered every natural defense. According to witnesses and the subsequent investigation, White asked Milk if they could speak privately. The request was not unusual. Private conversations happened regularly inside City Hall. Political disagreements were often handled behind closed doors before they ever reached public meetings. Milk agreed. The two men stepped into a smaller room adjoining the main office, away from staff and visitors. The door closed. Outside, employees continued working. Some sorted documents. Others answered telephones. No one had any reason to believe the conversation unfolding only a few feet away would become one of the most infamous moments in California history. Inside the room, there were only two men. One would never leave alive. The other would soon surrender to police. Exactly what passed between them during those final seconds has never been fully known. There were no surviving eyewitnesses. No recording. No transcript. Investigators could reconstruct the physical evidence. The conversation itself disappeared with Harvey Milk. What happened next occurred with horrifying speed. Dan White drew his revolver. The first shot struck Harvey Milk before he had any meaningful opportunity to react. The confined space amplified the violence. Milk collapsed as bullets tore through his body. Then, as investigators later concluded from the forensic evidence, White stepped closer. At point-blank range, he fired additional shots into Milk's head. The attack was devastating. There was no possibility of survival. The wounds were immediately fatal. Within only a matter of minutes, San Francisco had lost both its mayor and one of its most recognizable public figures. The building that had symbolized democratic government only moments earlier had become the scene of two political assassinations. Outside the office, confusion slowly replaced routine. Employees who had heard unusual sounds began looking into hallways. Some initially assumed heavy furniture had fallen. Others wondered whether construction work somewhere inside the building had caused the loud cracks echoing through the marble corridors. Only gradually did the terrible reality begin to emerge. Staff members discovered Harvey Milk lying on the floor. The sight was almost impossible to process. People froze. Some rushed forward instinctively, hoping there might still be something they could do. Others stood motionless, unable to understand what they were seeing. Emergency calls spread rapidly throughout the building. Voices that had moments earlier discussed meeting schedules now trembled with panic. Medical personnel were summoned immediately. Police officers raced toward the offices. Within minutes, City Hall transformed from a functioning government building into an active crime scene. Meanwhile, Dan White walked away. He did not run. He did not fire at anyone else. Witnesses later described him moving through the building with remarkable composure. That calmness became one of the most unsettling aspects of the entire case. Employees passed him in the hallways without realizing they were looking at the man responsible for the violence unfolding behind them. Some recognized him. None imagined what had just occurred. By the time the first desperate cries spread through the offices, White had already left the building. Outside, downtown San Francisco continued its ordinary Monday morning. Traffic lights changed from red to green. Buses collected passengers. Street vendors greeted customers. Only inside City Hall had time been violently interrupted. White climbed into his vehicle and drove away. His destination was not another hiding place. Not the airport. Not a remote highway leading out of California. Instead, he drove directly to the Northern Police Station. The decision surprised investigators less because of where he went than because of how he arrived. He entered calmly. There was no dramatic pursuit. No exchange of gunfire. No hostage situation. No attempt to negotiate. White approached officers and informed them that he wished to surrender. He admitted responsibility for the shootings. The confession was straightforward. He offered no resistance. Officers placed him under arrest. For law enforcement, the immediate question of identifying the suspect had already been answered. The investigation would focus instead on reconstructing exactly what had happened inside City Hall and determining why. Back at City Hall, emergency responders worked desperately despite knowing the injuries were catastrophic. George Moscone was pronounced dead. Harvey Milk was pronounced dead. The official confirmation spread through the building with heartbreaking speed. Staff members who had worked beside the two men only hours earlier struggled to comprehend the news. Some wept openly. Others stared silently into space. Several later recalled feeling as though the entire building had become strangely unreal, as if the familiar marble hallways no longer belonged to the city they thought they knew. Police officers sealed off the offices. Crime scene investigators photographed every room before anything could be moved. Spent cartridge casings were carefully documented. Bullet trajectories were analyzed. Bloodstains marked the locations where two public servants had taken their final breaths. Every detail mattered. Measurements. Photographs. Witness interviews. Nothing could be overlooked. Investigators understood immediately that the case would become one of the most closely examined homicide investigations in California history. News of the shootings reached local journalists within minutes. Radio stations interrupted regular programming. Television newsrooms scrambled to verify early reports. At first, the information seemed almost unbelievable. 2 elected officials. Inside City Hall. Shot to death. Rumors spread faster than confirmed facts. Some reports mistakenly suggested additional victims. Others questioned whether the attack might involve terrorism or a broader political conspiracy. Confusion dominated the first hours. As authorities confirmed the identities of the victims and the suspect, disbelief gave way to national shock. The assassination of a sitting mayor was extraordinarily rare in modern American history. The murder of Harvey Milk carried profound symbolic significance far beyond California. Milk had become one of the nation's most visible openly gay elected officials. His election represented hope for communities that had spent decades fighting simply to be acknowledged. Now, that hope appeared drenched in grief. Throughout the Castro district, word traveled from business to business with astonishing speed. Store owners stepped outside to speak with neighbors. Customers abandoned shopping as conversations turned toward the unfolding tragedy. Some refused to believe the reports. They insisted there had been some mistake. Harvey couldn't be dead. Not Harvey. Not after everything he had accomplished. As confirmation arrived, disbelief gradually transformed into sorrow. People gathered on sidewalks in silence. Others embraced complete strangers. Many simply cried. For countless members of San Francisco's LGBTQ+ community, Harvey Milk had represented more than an elected official. He had represented visibility, acceptance, the possibility of living honestly. His death felt deeply personal, even to those who had never met him. Across the city, George Moscon's supporters experienced a similar sense of loss. He had governed San Francisco during one of its most dynamic periods. Whether citizens agreed with every decision or not, few expected his life to end inside the office where he had dedicated himself to public service. Flags were lowered. Government offices struggled to continue functioning. Employees found themselves answering telephones from journalists around the world while mourning colleagues they had seen only hours before. As the afternoon wore on, the magnitude of the tragedy became increasingly clear. The murders were not merely another criminal case. They represented an attack on the heart of local government itself. Questions multiplied. Why had Dan White returned to City Hall armed with a revolver? Had the attacks been planned long in advance? Could they have been prevented? How had an armed former supervisor managed to bypass newly installed security measures? Every answer uncovered another question. Every detail deepened the sense of tragedy. Yet even as investigators worked methodically inside the crime scene, another battle had already begun to take shape. It would not be fought with firearms inside marble hallways. It would unfold inside courtrooms, across newspaper headlines, and throughout a city struggling to understand how political disagreement had escalated into irreversible violence. The search for justice had only just begun. By early afternoon, San Francisco City Hall no longer resembled the building that thousands of citizens had entered only hours earlier. The broad marble corridors, usually alive with the measured rhythm of government, had fallen into an uneasy silence interrupted only by hurried footsteps and the quiet voices of investigators coordinating their work. Elevators that normally carried city employees from meeting to meeting were now reserved for emergency personnel. Hallways were sealed with police tape. Uniformed officers stood guard at entrances where visitors had once wandered freely. Outside, the first television news vans lined the streets. Their satellite equipment had not yet become a familiar sight in American cities, but reporters understood immediately that they were witnessing a story of extraordinary national importance. Cameramen hurried across the sidewalks carrying heavy equipment while journalists rehearsed opening lines, each trying to summarize an event that still seemed almost impossible to comprehend. Inside, however, there was no time for disbelief. The work of documenting a homicide scene had already begun. Crime scene investigators entered Mayor George Moscon's office slowly, deliberately, careful not to disturb even the smallest piece of evidence. Every movement inside the room followed strict procedure. Photographs came first. Wide-angle images captured the entire office exactly as it had appeared after the shooting. Then investigators moved closer, documenting furniture, bloodstains, spent cartridge casings, bullet impacts, and every object whose position might later help reconstruct the sequence of events. The office still carried traces of an ordinary workday. Documents rested neatly on desks. Pens remained uncapped beside unfinished paperwork. Coffee cups stood where they had been placed earlier that morning. Nothing about the room suggested violence until the eye reached the areas investigators carefully marked with numbered evidence markers. There, the illusion of normality disappeared. The forensic team examined the trajectory of each bullet. The locations of the wounds, the placement of blood evidence, and the pattern of bullet strikes within the office all helped investigators recreate the final moments of George Moscon's life. Their conclusions would later support witness testimony describing a meeting that had begun as a private political conversation before transforming almost instantly into murder. Several bullets had been fired. The evidence indicated that after the initial shots, the shooter moved closer before firing additional rounds at extremely close range. The physical evidence left little room for uncertainty. This had not been an accidental discharge. Nor had it been a chaotic struggle over a weapon. The shooting displayed deliberate action. Only a short distance away, another investigative team worked inside Harvey Milk's office. The atmosphere there felt equally surreal. Unlike the mayor's office, which had remained relatively private, Milk's workspace reflected the personality of the man who occupied it. Papers covered the desk. Letters from constituents remained unopened. Campaign memorabilia and photographs reflected years of community organizing and public service. Visitors had often described the office as energetic rather than formal, a place where ideas moved as quickly as conversations. Now it had become another carefully preserved crime scene. Forensic photographers documented every angle before investigators examined the adjoining room where the fatal shooting had occurred. Again, the evidence told a devastatingly consistent story. Milk had entered the smaller office alive. Within moments, multiple gunshots ended his life. The proximity of the final wound suggested the shooter had approached after the initial shots. Every measurement reinforced what investigators already suspected. The attacks were intentional, methodical, separated by only minutes. Medical examiners soon arrived to begin the solemn process of examining the victims before transporting them for formal autopsies. For everyone involved, professionalism became essential. Many investigators personally knew both men. Some had spoken with Mayor Moscone during previous public events. Others had met Harvey Milk through community outreach or city meetings. Despite those connections, the work demanded emotional discipline. Evidence could not be influenced by grief. Every observation required accuracy. Every report would eventually face scrutiny inside one of the nation's most closely watched criminal trials. While forensic teams worked inside City Hall, detectives began interviewing everyone who had been present that morning. Secretaries described routine office activity before hearing sounds they initially failed to recognize as gunfire. Staff members recalled seeing Dan White walking through the hallways. Several remembered exchanging brief greetings with him. Nothing about his appearance had seemed unusual. He had not been shouting. He had not displayed visible panic. He appeared calm, focused, almost ordinary. That detail unsettled investigators. Violent offenders often leave behind witnesses who describe emotional outbursts, frantic behavior, or visible agitation. White's demeanor appeared remarkably controlled. Employees struggled to reconcile the composed man they had passed in the hallway with the horrifying reality unfolding only moments later. One witness remembered White moving with purpose rather than hesitation. Another recalled thinking it was natural to see him inside City Hall because, until recently, he had worked there. Recognition had replaced suspicion. No one had reason to stop him. Detectives carefully compared each account, constructing a minute-by-minute timeline. Piece by piece, the morning became clearer. White had entered through a basement window. He had proceeded directly toward the mayor's office. After leaving that office, he walked to Harvey Milk's workspace. Minutes later, he exited the building. The sequence aligned almost perfectly with the physical evidence. Meanwhile, officers at the Northern Police Station completed their own documentation. Dan White had already confessed. He had surrendered voluntarily. The revolver believed to be the murder weapon had been recovered. Investigators secured the firearm, preserving it for ballistic examination. Firearms experts would later compare microscopic markings inside the recovered bullets with the revolver's barrel, establishing with scientific certainty that the weapon recovered from White matched the bullets that killed both victims. Every major piece of physical evidence pointed in the same direction. Unlike many homicide investigations that begin with uncertainty, this case possessed an identified suspect, a confession, eyewitness accounts placing him inside the building, and substantial forensic evidence within only hours. The challenge facing investigators was no longer identifying who committed the crimes. It was understanding why. As detectives continued interviewing witnesses, they discovered the political context surrounding White's recent resignation and his unsuccessful effort to regain his position on the Board of Supervisors. Colleagues described increasing frustration during the previous weeks. Some recalled White expressing disappointment after learning that Mayor Moscone intended to appoint someone else to fill the vacant seat. Others described conversations reflecting financial strain and emotional exhaustion. Each interview added another layer to the developing picture. Investigators remained careful not to confuse motive with justification. Whatever pressures White had experienced, 2 people had been deliberately killed. The legal system would ultimately determine how those circumstances should be interpreted. Outside City Hall, crowds continued growing. News of Harvey Milk's death spread rapidly through the Castro district. Many residents walked toward downtown almost instinctively. Some hoped the reports were inaccurate. Others simply wanted to stand near the place where history had changed forever. People gathered behind police barriers, speaking in hushed voices while staring toward the grand dome rising above the city skyline. Journalists moved through the crowd interviewing anyone willing to speak. Expressions of disbelief repeated themselves again and again. People struggled to find words capable of describing emotions that had arrived without warning. Several supporters of Harvey Milk openly wept while recalling the optimism he had inspired only days earlier. Others remembered Mayor Moscon's willingness to listen to communities that had long felt ignored. Across San Francisco, businesses lowered their flags. Church bells rang in some neighborhoods. City employees who had not been inside City Hall that morning received phone calls informing them that colleagues and friends were gone. The reality settled slowly. By late afternoon, there was no longer any uncertainty. San Francisco had lost both its mayor and one of its most influential supervisors in a single act of political violence. The investigation itself had advanced with remarkable speed. The emotional consequences, however, were only beginning to unfold. Before the day ended, thousands would gather in mourning. Before the week ended, the entire nation would begin debating not only the murders themselves, but the political divisions, personal struggles, and questions of justice that surrounded them. The evidence inside City Hall had answered many factual questions. It could explain where the shooter had walked, which weapon had been used, how the attacks unfolded. What it could not explain was how years of public service, political disagreement, and personal disappointment had converged into a few irreversible minutes that forever changed the history of San Francisco.